Hey guys, I've got some really exciting stuff for you today. We're going to be talking about Wrath of the Lich King today, the expansion that many consider the peak of World of Warcraft, the last good expansion, the last true Blizzard game ever made, Blizzard's finale, and the best WoW expansion of all time. Now, for our rankings here, we're going to be considering the following: overall damage output in PvE situations, utility provided for the raid, and desirability. How many are going to be wanted in any given raid? Now I'm going to go class by class and show you how good each spec is, and then at the end we will do our final ranking and compare each spec and each class to find out the absolute top tier in Wrath of the Lich King. Timestamps provided throughout for your convenience. Now let's start with the Warrior. Now, the Warrior has a potential to do incredible things in Wrath of the Lich King. With Titan's Grip added at the end of the Fury tree, it allows warriors to equip two-handed axes, maces, and swords in one hand, while you have a two-handed weapon equipped in one hand. Your physical damage done is reduced by 10%. So you can have two-handers, dual-wielding two-handers in Wrath of the Lich King. This is the iconic Titan's Grip talent in Wrath of the Lich King, and it is amazing. It is making Fury Warriors one of the top DPS picks for Wrath of the Lich King. They're absolutely incredible. They, of course, are great at single target with Execute, but also can do quite well in more than two mobs, AoE scenarios. On the other hand, when we're looking at Arms Warriors, they actually have kind of a harder time in PvE content, whether that's finding a group or performing well. It's not really a PvE spec. Now it does bring trauma to the raid, the ability. hopefully the Arms Warrior isn't causing trauma to your raid, but it might. Your melee critical strikes increase the effectiveness of bleed effects on the target by 30% for 1 minute. Now, really the main benefactor of this is the Feral Druid benefiting from this effect. And you might, again, see this in PvP with like a bleed cleave, but that is for another time. So this is the Warrior. Fury is really the main PvE spec. Okay, let's move on to Hunter. Now, marksmanship has been revamped, and Chimera Shot is the main new addition for the marksmanship hunter. It's pretty incredible. It's a instant cast, 10-second cooldown shot, which refreshes your current sting and actually triggers an effect depending on what sting is currently on your target. So Serpent Sting, if that's on your target, it'll deal 40% of the damage done by your Serpent Sting instantly. Viper Sting will instantly restore mana to you, equal to 60% of the total amount drained by your Viper Sting. And then Scorpion Sting actually disarms the target for 10 seconds, cannot occur more than once per minute. So that's pretty good, Chimera Shot. And then also hunters are bringing, of course, marksmanship hunters are bringing True Shot Aura, which increases the attack power of party and raid members, that's right, within 100 yards by 10%. So that's a pretty nice bonus there. Hunters do quite well. They bring, of course, that aura is helpful for both melee and ranged physical damage dealing classes. They contribute a steady amount of damage, and it's of course not necessarily known for burst, but it has fantastic sustain, which it can bring to the raid. Now let's talk a little bit about Beast Mastery. You can see here it's not doing too well in my ranking. Now, the Beast Mastery Hunter was a powerhouse in the Burning Crusade. It was incredible. Kind of took a hit here in Wrath of the Lich King, not really being one of the best PvE specializations. Now, Beast Mastery, if you remember, brings a utility to the raid called Ferocious Inspiration, which increases raid-wide damage by 1%. It's actually obsolete in Wrath of the Lich King because if you bring an Arcane Mage, they bring Arcane Empowerment, which is simply better, and it does not stack. So if you have an Arcane Mage, which is a better PvE spec, then there's really no reason to have a Beast Mastery Hunter. Of course, PvP being a different story for BM, but that's for another video. Now let's talk a little bit about survival. If you remember TBC, you might want to bring one survival to the raid for Exposed Weakness. Well, unfortunately, Exposed Weakness was changed from granting increased attack power for all attackers against a target by a proportion of your agility to just granting that bonus to yourself, just the hunter. So survival doesn't really offer any utility in Wrath of the Lich King, so it's sort of in the same boat with Beast Mastery not really being the best PvE spec. Marksmanship is the way to go for hunter in Wrath of the Lich King PvE. All right, now let's move on to the Rogue. Assassination Rogue, not really the spec for PvE. Now, I did put Tricks of the Trade there, but it's actually a rogue-wide ability. It's not just Assassination that gets Tricks of the Trade. And actually, once I said that word, hopefully the nostalgia, the memories all comes back about how incredible Tricks of the Trade is. The current party or raid member becomes the target of your Tricks of the Trade. The threat caused by your next attack and all actions taken for 6 seconds afterwards will be transferred to the target. In addition, all damage caused by the target is increased by 15% during this time. Amazing. So Tricks of the Trade is one of Rogue's newest abilities in Wrath of the Lich King, which is an incredible addition to the class. If you see here, combat rogues are actually amazing. I gave them highest ranking possible. Combat rogues have Killing Spree, which steps through the shadows from enemy to enemy within 10 yards, attacking an enemy every half second with both weapons until 5 assaults are made, increasing all damage done by 20% for the duration. And you can hit the same target multiple times. It has a 2-minute cooldown. It's incredible. It's at the end of the combat tree. So rogues have extremely high damage, so they're highly sought after. It can be burst. Obviously, Killing Spree sounds quite bursty, right? Single target output is incredible compared to TBC because of Killing Spree. And also, they finally have some AoE capabilities, which have been greatly improved with the addition of Fan of Knives. Instantly throw both weapons at all targets within 8 yards, causing 105% weapon damage with daggers and 70% weapon damage with all other weapons. So you can see it kind of scales there. Daggers will get more of a boost because typically they do less damage, but it's a nice AoE, costs 50 energy. It's quite nice. Now, of course, rogues do bring utility in the form of disarming traps or sap or Tricks of the Trade, which is a very nice threat management tool. And of course, rogues typically are gear dependent, so keep that in mind. You know, of course, the better gear you get as a rogue, the better you're going to do in PvE. And subtlety, I would say, just to kind of finish off with rogue, it's really more of a PvP specialization. It doesn't really bring much to the raid. Overall, the specialization is not incredible in PvE scenarios, so I gave it quite a low ranking there. Okay, we're moving on to the Shaman. And again, we're just looking at damage, DPS, specs. So let's talk a little bit about Elemental. Well, I would say they're, you know, pretty nice in PvP, but in PvE, they don't really keep up compared to the other spellcasters. Now, of course, they do bring that Totem of Wrath to the raid, which was highly sought after in TBC, but unfortunately, in the Burning Crusade, it's actually shared with the Moonkin aura, so it's actually not needed anymore. Overall, Elemental Shaman is nice. Of course, if you don't have a balanced druid, then absolutely take an Elemental Shaman. And of course, totems are always fantastic, but I would say overall, not necessarily the most sought after specialization in Wrath of the Lich King. Now, enhancement shamans are sort of in the same boat. They can dish out a good amount of damage, but I would say that their rotation kind of is hard to deal with. And of course, the gearing process isn't always straightforward with enhancement shamans. So it's not necessarily the best specialization. I think you'd see them rarely in raids, probably replaced by more min-maxing better classes. Of course, they do bring Unleashed Rage. It's kind of a nice little attack power bonus, but I don't think they're the greatest for DPS. Moving on to Warlock. Now, Warlocks have gotten a lot of revamped abilities. There's a ton here. I couldn't even show it all on this slide because of how much it has actually changed. The Affliction specialization has been very updated in Wrath of the Lich King, now with a lot better damage capabilities rather than just offering buffs or debuffs in the form of, you know, Malediction or things like that. So as you can see, Malediction, the talent, has completely been changed. Instead of giving a bonus to Curse of Elements, it now actually increases your own spell damage by 3% and increases the periodic critical strike chance of your Corruption and Unstable Affliction spells by 9%. 9% crit. That's incredible. So Malediction is now no longer a support talent, but more of a straight up helps with damage. Now, Affliction also got a new talent called Improved Fell Hunter. Now, this actually makes your Fel Hunters Fel Intelligence, which is a new unique buff that is now provided to the raid. Gives party and raid members 48 intellect and 64 spirit. And yes, it does stack with both arcane intellect and spirit, whatever the priest spirit buff is called. So the Affliction Warlock does much better damage than in TBC, and they still offer some great utility to the raid. Now, of course, there is Haunt at the end of the Affliction tree, which is a powerful new dot ability. There's also Death's Embrace, a nice new talent that even further increases Warlock's damage. So Affliction Warlock's quite powerful in Wrath of the Lich King. And of course, Warlocks have actually been given an Execute ability. That's right. So Drain Soul has been revamped. Let's check it out. So drains the soul of the target, causing 710 shadow damage over 15 seconds. If the target is at or below 25% health, this is the Execute mechanic, Drain Soul causes 4 times the normal damage, of course, and then all about generating soul shards. Each time the drained soul damages the target, it also has a chance to generate a soul shard. So you're going to have much more soul shards as a warlock. I can imagine probably having too many, but this is a very nice Execute ability, which fits very nicely with the Affliction tree. It's a lot of shadow damage. It actually gives warlocks a reason to rank up that drained soul. Typically, you just get rank 1, because what's the point? It doesn't really do that much damage. Now that has changed. Now, I really want to talk about Demonology. Demonology is actually, I would say, much better than in the Burning Crusade because of the spell power buff called Demonic Pact, which increases your spell damage by 10% and your pet's criticals apply the Demonic Pact effect to your party or raid members. So this is raid-wide. Demonic Pact increases spell power by 10%. Of your spell damage for 45 seconds. This effect has a 20-second cooldown, does not work on enslaved demons. So you can give a raid-wide spell power bonus to the entire raid. Of course, you'd only need one Demonology Warlock, so I didn't give them too high of a ranking due to that. You do have to keep in mind that, their damage isn't necessarily the best. I would say it's the utility that's really sought after. And so, that's sort of where they lie in the ranking. Now, of course, we're going to talk about Destruction. What is it doing there at the bottom? Destruction was absolutely the best spec in the Burning Crusade, sort of undeniably. A couple things happened. Well, Shadow Weaving was nerfed. That was the priest talent, which caused the target to take bonus shadow damage. Of course, that's not the only thing, because Fire Destro was also a thing in TBC. But really, it doesn't have the same... It didn't get the same love as Affliction did and Demonology did. It's sort of the same... it doesn't really offer anything special, and so it's not necessarily keeping up with the other specializations. Okay, let's move on to Paladin. Now, Ret Paladins were blessed with certain gifts in Wrath of the Lich King. Of course, Divine Storm, the new Retribution ability, which does AoE up to 4 targets, also heals 3 party or raid members. So it's a nice utility on top of another ability, thank goodness. Ret Paladins didn't have very many abilities. They also got Aura Mastery, which is quite nice. It's going to allow your concentration aura to give silence immunity and interrupt immunity to all players if you have concentration aura. It also is going to increase the effect of all their auras by 100%, 2-minute cooldown. But really another one is Judgments of the Wise. This is some nice utility. Damaging judgment spells have a 100% chance to grant the replenishment effect to up to 10 party or raid members' mana regeneration equal to 1% of their maximum mana per 5 seconds for 15 seconds, and immediately grant you 25% of your base mana. So it's a nice little 3% of your mana back every time a paladin is judging. So another little mana battery ability there, making Ret Paladins have some additional utility. Also, Judgment of the Wise, of course, can help with your own mana regeneration. And there's also Swift Retribution. Your auras also increase casting ranged and melee attack speeds by 3%. A nice little additional utility. So Paladins have lots of utility, of course. We didn't even mention all of the blessings, such as Blessing of Protection, Freedom, Salvation, Kings, so on. You know the Pally buffs. So, you know, Paladins, especially Retribution Paladins, do bring a lot to the raid, and their damage has been buffed to actually be considerable. Now we're going to talk about Paladin's counterpart, the Death Knight, the new class, the new hero class in Wrath of the Lich King. Now Death Knights are fun. They're just an awesome theme. It's a great class fantasy. But Unholy is actually a quite good spec as well in PvE. They have great single target damage and also AoE damage through the use of Pestilence, which causes shadow damage to the target and all targets nearby and spreads any diseases from the initial target to the additional targets. So absolutely some great AoE potential there. And not only that, but they do bring some nice utility to the raid. We have Ebon Plague, which is a talent which turns your Crypt Fever into Ebon Plague, which increases magic damage taken by the target by 13%, in addition to increasing disease damage taken by 30%. So you can see some synergies there. I do believe that Devouring Plague is a disease, so you can see some synergy there with a Shadow Priest. But of course, with all casters, Ebon Plague is very helpful. And so the utility of the Unholy Death Knight is absolutely there. Frost is also pretty decent. You can do a spec where you get this Frost talent called Improved Icy Talons as Unholy, but of course you could get it as well if you were Frost. But Improved Icy Talons is a nice raid-wide utility which increases the melee haste of all party and raid members within 100 yards by 20% and your haste by an additional 5%. So quite nice. Death Knights absolutely brings some damage, brings some utility, and it's a pretty sought after class. So that is some good news there for Death Knights. Let's move on to Priest. Priests only have one damage spec, and that is Shadow. We're going to talk a little bit about some of the changes. So, of course, we talked about Shadow Weaving being nerfed, only applies to the Priest now. But the spec itself actually got pretty buffed. You know, their damage is actually very good. They've got great single target damage. They actually do a pretty decent amount of AoE damage. But really, the benefit of Shadow Priest, of course, is Vampiric Touch, dealing shadow damage over 15 seconds and causing your up to 10 party or raid members to gain 1% of their maximum mana per 5 seconds when you deal damage from Mind Blast. In addition, if the Vampiric Touch is dispelled, it'll cause damage to the afflicted target. So I don't think PvE targets will necessarily be dispelling, but Vampiric Touch, of course, being that mana battery. Dispersion, typically you'd think of as a PvP talent, but it does actually help a little bit in PvE. Of course, it will reduce all damage taken, which can be helpful in Wrath of the Lich King, helping soak damage if needed, helping out your healers, of course, but it also helps you regenerate 6% of your mana every 1 second for 6 seconds. 6 times 6 is 36. It's a spell that gives you back 36% of your mana for over 6 seconds, which is very nice. So priests Shadow Priests really shouldn't be struggling much with mana in Wrath of the Lich King, and of course their damage is buffed, so overall, pretty good class, I would say, in Wrath of the Lich King. Alright, let's move on to Mage. Mage is pretty much always good, am I right? Well, that does not change in Wrath of the Lich King. Now, Arcane Mage has a nice raid-wide ability called Arcane Empowerment. We talked about how this is sort of replacing the Beast Mastery Hunter's Ferocious Inspiration. Arcane Empowerment increases the damage of your Arcane Missile spell by an amount equal to 45% of your spell power and the damage of your Arcane Blast by 9% of your spell power. In addition, increases the damage of all party and raid members within 100 yards by 3%. So there it is. It's better than Ferocious Inspiration, 3 times better, in fact, and that's going to give a raid-wide buff. So there you go. That's why Arcane Mages are quite good, not to mention they already do some very good damage, and they bring that utility as well. Now, let's talk a little about Fire. Fire is ridiculous. I can't even begin to tell you how insane it is. Listen to Hot Streak. This is what a Fire Mage gets. Anytime you score 2 non-periodic spell criticals in a row using Fireball, Fire Blast, Scorch, Living Bomb, or Frost Firebolt, you have a 100% chance the next Pyroblast spell cast within 10 seconds will be instant cast. That means every time you crit twice in a row, you get a free instant cast Pyroblast. That's that summarized. So that's incredible. It makes mages absolutely insane, fire mages. It's absolutely incredible. On top of Hot Streak, they also got Living Bomb, which is a nice AoE spell. Instant cast, target becomes a living bomb, taking 1400 fire damage over 12 seconds. After 12 seconds, or when the spell is dispelled, the target explodes, dealing 700 fire damage to all enemies within 10 yards. So nice AoE ability there. And then, of course, there's another talent that is notorious for mages in Wrath of the Lich King, which is Torment the Weak. Your Frostbolt, Fireball, Frost Firebolt, Pyroblast, Arcane Missiles, Arcane Blast, and Arcane Barrage abilities deal 12% more damage to snared or slowed targets. Now, in a PvE setting, chances are, if even if you have like a Death Knight, almost all their, well, not all of their abilities, but there's going to be probably a Desecration on the ground, which is a 50% slow. Torment the Weak, that the chances are you're almost always going to be casting on a snared or slowed target. It's just a very nice talent. 12% more damage is pretty incredible. Granted, I believe some mobs might be immune to snare or slow, of course, but Torment the Weak, it's very notorious for being extremely good, and that is in the Arcane tree. And Frost, saving the worst for last. This is really a PvP spec. There's not much it can do in a PvE setting what Fire and Arcane can do much better, and Frost doesn't particularly bring anything utility-wise to the raid. That's not nearly as good as Fire or Arcane. So those are the two specs for mages for PvE. And finally, last but not least, let's talk about the Druid. Druid got lots of love in in Wrath of the Lich King. Balance is quite a good spec. They got Starfall. This is a nice AoE ability. You summon a flurry of stars from the sky on all targets within 30 yards of the caster, each dealing 500 to 600 arcane damage. Also causes 100 arcane damage to all other enemies within 5 yards. Maximum 20 stars, last 10 seconds. Very nice. It's a very nice AoE ability. They also bring Earth and Moon to the raid. Now, this is the buff I was referring to earlier. Your Wrath and Starfire spells have a 100% chance to apply Earth and Moon, which increases spell damage taken by 13% for 12 seconds. Also increases your spell damage by 6%. So you can see how balanced druids have very nice utility for casters in Wrath of the Lich King. They also bring improved Fairy Fire, which increases the chance your target will be hit by spell attacks by 3%, and increases the critical strike chance of your damage spells by 3% on targets afflicted by Fairy Fire. So very, very nice buff there for the raid, both of those. So Boomkins absolutely being very helpful. They do a lot of damage in Wrath of the Lich King, so very nice spec overall. And Feral also is quite a good spec in Wrath of the Lich King. Of course, Leader of the Pack being an excellent utility, granting ranged and melee critical strike increase by 5% for party and raid members, and then also the Feral Fairy Fire, decreasing the armor of the target by 5%, which is very nice. Especially if you have a physical damage dealing stacked raid, which you probably will in Wrath of the Lich King with warriors and rogues. But let's move on now to the best part, the part you've probably been waiting for. We're now going to rank all of these classes and specs and decide which one is the best. So here is my opinion, my ranking here. Up here at S tier, being the absolute best DPS class spec combination, I would say are Fury Warriors, Combat Rogues, Affliction Warlocks, Retribution Paladins, and I could not include Fire Mages. These are absolutely, in my opinion, some of the best class spec combinations for damage dealing in Wrath of the Lich King, for the reasons we kind of discussed throughout the video. A tier, we have Marksmanship, Unholy, Shadow, Arcane Mages, and Balance Druids. These all are amazing specs as well. You can't argue that they're good. They're A tier, absolutely good. In B tier, I put Demonology. They bring great utility to the raid. You know, maybe you're not going to want more than one, obviously, so maybe they're B tier. They're, you know, for that reason, maybe they're not super desirable. Frost, they do bring some utility, but, you know, Unholy is probably the better pick, right? Feral, also bringing that utility. You're probably going to want at least one for Leader of the Pack, etc. And then let's move on to C tier. We have Arms, which is much better in PvP, which is sort of the same deal for Elemental and Enhance. Kind of obsolete in Wrath of the Lich King. Not saying it's bad, not necessarily the best though. Destruction Warlock kind of fell behind in Wrath of the Lich King, and Survival as well, becoming obsolete. And then we have D tier, specs that are sort of in meme spec territory where, you know, it's not really for PvE. BM, much better suited for PvP. The same can be said for Subtlety. It's almost entirely PvP. Assassination and Frost, all PvP specs really doesn't have a place in PvE. All right, well, let's move on to the conclusion here. Just want to say thank you so much for watching. I really hope you learned something from this guide. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What did I get right? What did I get wrong, in your opinion? If I missed anything, let me know in the comments. You know, and also feel free to join our community on YouTube. More guides like this are always coming, so if you enjoyed it, subscribe on YouTube to make sure you don't miss the next guide. And until next time, thanks, guys, and take care.